Everyone. We will now begin with our first round of general questions. Each candidate has 60 seconds to respond, then a 30-second rebuttal. Mr. Mast, you will begin first in this round. Ms. Rodriguez, go ahead with your question.
Sure. Do you support State Senator Joe Negron's proposal to buy $1.2 billion of land south of Lake Okeechobee to send water south to curb Lake Okeechobee discharges to the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee rivers? If yes, how do you plan to push this in Congress? If not, what's your solution?
This is one of the issues where my opponent and I differ. I am a big proponent for supporting State Senator Joe Negron's plan for buying 60,000 acres in order to convey water south from Lake Okeechobee towards the River of Grass and towards the Florida Bay. Now, the way that I propose in getting funding for this program, I've said often that I will vie to be a member of the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure. It's that committee that recently passed the Water Resources and Development Act, and as the next member of Congress from this district, I will go back to that committee and work to get the next set of resources that we need in order to buy up that land south of Lake Okeechobee. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do in order to save our coastal waters and our coastal estuaries, is making sure that we find a way to convey that water south. But we have to do more than that as well. We have to make sure that we're always keeping saltwater estuaries salty and freshwater estuaries fresh, and making sure that we also find ways to keep sewage out of our waterways as well.
Mr. Perkins, you have 60 seconds.
What I support is real solutions, and with all due respect to Senator Negron, he knows as well as I do that stands zero chance of passing in this next session. You have to have cooperation from legislatures all over the state and have their own issues. It's not going to happen. What we need to do is we need to utilize the land that we have north of the lake, tens of thousands of acres. We need to stop the flow of water coming from the north into Lake Okeechobee. We need to deal with water runoff that has nothing to do with Lake Okeechobee in this district, secondary runoff. We need to strengthen our levees. And my opponent says he wants to sit on this committee. I understand this committee. FEMA, Corps of Engineers, I promise you, we work with these agencies for the last 25 years. But he also has to remember there's multiple Democrats on this committee too, and his unwillingness to reach across the aisle and work with everybody is not going to solve anything, starting with this problem.
Mr. Mast, your rebuttal is 30 seconds.
Well, I like to think that I know as well as anybody about how to overcome challenges. And I think if there's one thing that I know, it's this, that whether you believe you can do something or whether you believe you can't do something, you're probably going to be right. I believe that we're going to find a way to buy that land south of Lake Okeechobee. I'm going to work to do it. And if you're a person that doesn't believe that that's going to be possible, you're not going to have the passion that's needed in order to accomplish that mission.
No applause, please. Mr. Perkins, your rebuttal is 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, I do think that there is a piece of this solution requires land south. But my opponent has a one-stop shop for this solution, and that's not the case. There are multiple components to this problem. We have to be able to bring everybody to the table, and that includes agriculture, in particular sugar, who now my opponent, after taking their money and saying he gave it back but didn't, now wants to vilify them. Here's what I can tell you. If you vilify anybody that needs to be part of the solution, the problem's not getting solved.
Mr. Bennett, your question for the candidates.
Sure. Social Security, if nothing is done to Social Security the way it's set up right now, the Board of Trustees for Social Security estimates that it will no longer be able to pay full benefits beginning in 2034. What do you propose specifically to do to extend the life of Social Security?
Mr. Perkins, you have 60 seconds.
Well, first of all, we have to realize that, first and foremost, our seniors who have gone without an increase in their Social Security benefits for multiple years now, I support a mandatory increase right now, 2.5%, 3%, every single year to help them with the additional cost of milk, the additional cost of bread and groceries. Their property taxes are going up. We have to look at sensible solutions, but we have to work together because this issue affects seniors and Democrats all across Republicans and Democrats all across this country. We might want to look at having this raise it on the employer side and the employee side, maybe 0.5%, maybe 1% total. And we have to start looking at real solutions to find the money to make sure when the funding starts running low that we're able to continue to fund this very important program that has kept millions of seniors out of poverty since its inception.
Mr. Mast, you have 60 seconds.
I know the question was asked for real solutions, but I didn't hear any just now. I believe very strongly in protecting Social Security. My father, who's 86 years old, he relies upon Social Security and Medicare. I've been at the forefront of saying one of the things that my opponent disagrees with. It's that the system stay in place exactly as it is for those that are receiving benefits right now, those that are anywhere close to receiving benefits right now. But for somebody my age, I'm 36 years old, or not to give away my wife's age, she's 37 years old, that we graduate the age for people our age to start receiving some of these benefits so that it can continue to last, because we have to answer this question. At its peak, there were 16 workers paying in for every one recipient of Social Security. Today, there are only 3 workers paying in for every one recipient. And what we have to figure out is how we get that ratio back up. And that's one of the solutions that I've just offered. The other thing that I'll say is this: we are not going to be able to make these programs last in the way that we want to without saving this economy, without getting ourselves out from under the kind of failed policies that have resulted in less than 3% growth of this economy over the last 8 years.
Mr. Perkins, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Not sure what his answer was, but we can look at raising the cap, raising the age, but raising the cap from $118,500 when 80+% of the people in this country don't even make that to begin with. Our small businesses, if you ask them to raise the cap to $250,000, they're going to pay themselves $115,000. They're going to take the rest in a dividend distribution, so they're not paying any more anyways. We need to look at real solutions together on both sides of the aisle at how we're going to deal with this problem. And just quit using talking points and not getting anywhere. But our seniors are suffering today, and we need to address that problem today, and we'll address generations to come in the future. We got to take care of our seniors today.
Time is up, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Mast, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
One of the things my opponents have said over and over again is we need to print more money, we need to print more, we need to print more. And I don't think Randy understands the economics of just how dangerous it is to go out there and print more money when you consider one of the most dangerous things for seniors, for retirees, for people on fixed incomes is inflation. Because the cost of their living will go up, but the price and the dollars that they're getting in terms of benefits will not go up. And that's one of the most dangerous things that he's been saying in terms of benefits for our seniors and those on fixed incomes.
Ms. Eschbach, your question for the candidates.
It's been a very divisive time up in Washington, D.C., with the presidential campaign nearing an end. Who do you support for president, and why or why not?
Mr. Mast, you have 60 seconds.
Everybody has heard me say that if the election were held today, Donald Trump would still have my support. I'm not going to pretend to anybody that either of these candidates have not gone out there and said and done things that should never be excused. They both have. And I think for each of us, it comes down to how those things that they've said and done affect our lives personally. For me, when I look at the two candidates, I can tell you that Hillary Clinton has been party to leaving one of my personal friends, Chris Paranto, or people know him as Chris Tanto Paranto, leaving him for dead in Benghazi. And when I think about her wearing the hat of Commander-in-Chief, and all my friends that are still on the battlefield today, that's not something that I can ever allow to happen. Beyond that, I think that she's wrong in terms of Iran, wrong in terms of Gitmo, wrong in terms of immigration, wrong in terms of so many other issues that are affecting the direction of this country, and it's for that reason that Donald Trump will still have my support today.
Mr. Perkins, you have 60 seconds.
I am voting for Hillary Clinton, and I believe she will be the best commander-in-chief. I believe she will bring our jobs back. She will strengthen our economy. She will protect our national security interests. But I don't know how you could vote for a man who vilifies women, who promotes sexual assault on girls as young as 10 years old, who degrades women, who ranks them on a system of 1 to 10. To me, it's about character, moral character, and have somebody like that sit in the White House, the most powerful person on this planet, in this world, who degrades women at every level, to me is just a non-starter. I could never support that. Hillary Clinton's got my vote and my support.
Mr. Mast, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
And I will reiterate, this is not an easy decision for anybody. This isn't like the old 80s movie with Richard Pryor, Brewster's Millions, where we can fill in a blank that says none of the above. That's not the option for anybody. It will be Donald Trump or it will be Hillary Clinton. And as I've said, it's going to be personal for each one of us. For me, the fact that she left one of my friends to die in Benghazi means that I could never support her as Commander-in-Chief.
Mr. Perkins, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Again, I continue to honor Brian for his service and his sacrifices, and every man and woman, particularly the man that he's talking about. But this is about character. This is about your moral compass. And again, to have a man sitting in the Oval Office who talks like he talks and degrades women, who wants to deny women, as my opponent does, their fundamental right to make choices, who wants to defend Planned Parenthood, who wants to destroy the equality in this country and the human rights for everybody, I'm sorry, could never get my support and should not be president.
Let's move on now to some questions submitted via social media. The first question is for Mr. Mast with a rebuttal by Mr. Perkins. We will have 2 questions. This is from Benjamin S. He wants to know, if voters approve this year's medical marijuana amendment to the Florida Constitution, will you support federal legislation to make the federal standards the same? Mr. Mast, you have 90 seconds to answer.
I tell people often that if you were to classify me with a label, it would be conservatarian. That I'm very fiscally conservative, but I'm also very libertarian in many of my views. I simply don't want the federal government involved in places where they shouldn't be involved. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution very specifically delineates the powers of the federal government, and the 10th Amendment tells us everything else should belong to the states. Marijuana is one of those issues that's not covered in the Constitution. I would not like to see the federal government playing a role in deciding whether it's something that should be allowed by each one of the states. So in answer to your question, I would support whatever the state of Florida decides. Beyond that, I think there has to be a divide between whether we're talking about recreational use of marijuana and what the states decide for themselves, and the medicinal use of marijuana and what the FDA approves in terms of some sort of medicine, and that's something that has to be spoken about as well.
Mr. Perkins, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
That's coming up to vote this year, and if the people of the state of Florida vote to pass it, then I support what the people of the state of Florida do. Brian and I don't differ as far as from a federal standpoint on this particular policy in medical marijuana. So again, I would leave it up to states in this particular case to make the decisions that the residents and the people that vote in that states decide to make.
This second question from social media is for Mr. Perkins with a rebuttal by Mr. Mast. This was submitted by Phil B. He asks, Obamacare has enrolled millions of uninsured but has done nothing to reduce the cost of insurance or medical procedures. What one significant change would you like to make to the Affordable Care Act? Mr. Perkins, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, the things that I do support clearly are the fact that it's providing medical insurance, pre-existing conditions for families with loved ones in need, and it has provided, as you just said, millions of Americans with insurance that they didn't have before. But to understand how to solve the problem with insurance to begin with, listen, the insurance in our own company has gone up 32% in the last 2 years. I understand why insurance companies are leaving the exchange, and small businesses and companies like mine, the burden is being passed on them. However, Speaker Ryan said it's not being repealed. So we need to take the problems within it, and we need to solve them. But we also have to work with our insurance companies. We have to deal with the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs. We have to deal with medical malpractice insurance. There's a reason insurance companies have to charge the premiums that they do. I want to work with all our business, in particular our insurance companies, say we have to continue to provide affordable insurance to every American. That is a right that they should have. What do you need from Congress? Is it government regulations? Is it our tax structures, tax reform? What do you need from Congress so we can make it more friendly environment for you to conduct business, so we can ask you as Congress to provide the things that we need you to provide, which is health insurance for everybody in this country?
Mr. Mast, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, I think we can all agree that the Affordable Care Act has left millions without coverage, left millions of people without the doctors that they wanted, without the plans that they wanted, left millions of people probably without jobs because of the people who couldn't go out there and hire because of the premium hikes that have gone on. In the state of Florida, we are seeing on average this year 17% premium hikes. At its peak, if you have Humana Healthcare, you're going to see a 36% premium hike. That is something very serious to everybody out there. Now, the question that was asked, what would we like to see changed? One thing that I would like to see changed with the Affordable Care Act is making sure that it's people that get to go out there and decide the plans that are best for them, not the federal government determining what is best to be placed in an insurance plan. That is the biggest problem with this.
Let's move on now to round 2 from our panelists with specific questions from each candidate. Ms. Rodriguez, you have a direct question for Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins, you've said you can work across the aisle, but voters blasted you and Mr. Mast for his part after a heated Treasure Coast newspaper's editorial board meeting. How can you convince those voters that you can and will listen to your opposing party's delegates and have a civil discourse to reach a compromise? And do you believe you owe Mr. Mast an apology?
Mr. Perkins, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, I'm not sure what the second question, if you could be more specific on that in a minute. But listen, I built a very successful business from a one-person mowing lawns 32 years ago to one of the most successful disaster recovery and management companies in this country today. And I know what it's like to provide insurance, and I know the tough decisions that have to be made by running a company. I've actually done it. I've actually created thousands of jobs over the last 25 years. And I've worked together with both sides, Republicans and Democrats, at the local, state, and federal level to build the successful business that I'm very proud of today. But it's also about actually being able to work together. I'm a problem solver. I know how to find common ground and a common bond with anybody to get dialogue moving, to get problem solved. And the fact of the matter is, again, my opponent thinks that the Democrats in Congress are evil. He agrees with Donald Trump that they need to be exterminated. So I'm sure, I can tell you this for sure, when I get, if I'm elected to the seat, I will be able to go to Washington, D.C. and knock on doors of Republicans on the first day and be invited in to start solving these problems that we have in this country.
Mr. Mast, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
Some comments aren't even worth replying to. And I can tell you this, I'm a big boy. I don't need an apology from Randy Perkins, but he did say some things that were very distasteful. To expect thanks for he said, his tax dollars paying for my VA care, or to try to make a joke about somebody who lost their legs in combat by saying I'm not man enough to stand up to him. I don't think that's the kind of person that can go up there and walk across the aisle and work with other people. I can tell you that it's been my experience, my job to work with people from every single background. It didn't matter how many pennies were in their pocket, the color of their skin, whether they were gay or straight or anything else, didn't matter where they came from in this country. I worked with everybody under the most austere possible conditions that you could probably never imagine in your life, and I still got the mission accomplished.
Mr. Bennett, you have a direct question for Mr. Mast.
Sure. Your opponent brought up briefly sugar contributions, and I wonder if you could clear this up. You did accept some contributions from the sugar industry, which you returned. I believe those totaled $11,000 or $12,000. But those people from the sugar industry also hosted some fundraisers where you raised a lot more money. And in the primary and in the general election, your opponents have said you should return that money as well. You've chosen not to. Can you explain why that is?
I think it's a fair thing for somebody to ask, but the reality of the situation is that I did not actually raise more money. When I instructed my team to go back there and return every dollar to the sugar industry, that is exactly what they did. And I've provided lists of all of the other donors to both you, George Bennett, and other people that have been a part of the media, outlining my relationship with every one of those other donors, people that I know from my time at Harvard, people that I know from my pro-Israel advocacy around the country, people that I know from my time speaking for their nonprofit organizations, but people that had nothing to do with the sugar industry, who simply for political reasons, my opponents are trying to say, are somehow tied to the sugar industry. But I will tell you this, I'm new to politics. I don't know every single player in the game. I don't know every single lobbyist out there, and I make mistakes. And that's part of what you get out of somebody that's new into politics. But this is the other thing that you get out of somebody new in politics. When I make a mistake, I'm not afraid to go out there and fix it. And that's not something that we see across the board in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Perkins, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
First of all, the $5-6 million that the Republican Party and the outside groups are spending at me. First of all, and again, they mischaracterized anything that I said against Brian or veterans. So I apologize to all veterans if the outside groups have painted me of saying things that I didn't say. But the fact of the matter is, Brian Mast did take sugar money. He was at their homes. He knows who the fanhools are. And he said on January 15th he gave the money back, but returned it 3 days after the primary. So facts are facts, and fiction is fiction. This is a fact. He's also taken money from All Aboard Florida and the outside groups and companies that represent All Aboard Florida on the train that's coming through our backyards.
Ms. Eschbach, you have a direct question for Mr. Perkins.
Both of you talk about lowering taxes on the middle class and strengthening the middle class again, but you have very different routes on which you believe you should get there. What do you believe should be the income threshold for increased taxes if you do choose to increase taxes on the wealthier Americans?
Mr. Perkins, you have 90 seconds.
Well, first of all, before we start making decisions and start trying to solve one problem, we have to realize what the collateral effect might be on the other side. I think clearly we need tax reform in this country, but I want to get to Washington, D.C., and I want to sit down with the economists and other agencies. I want to meet with other members of Congress who've been here for a while and been dealing with these issues. So to stand here and say today, I'm going to do A, B, and C is not a realistic approach. We have to deal with tax reform. We have to put more money in people's pockets. But we have shown by raising taxes in this country that our government's really not efficient with the money that we're bringing in as we continue to raise taxes. We need to deal with the fraud, waste, and abuse in our government, and we need to become an efficient government. And I'm going to look and explore every single way to do that. But to sit here today and I'm saying I'm going to start raising tax on the wealthy, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm going to assess the situation, meet with the experts. I'm a numbers guy, I can promise you that. I've been dealing with numbers since I was 19 years old and building businesses for the last 32 years. And that's one thing I do understand.
Mr. Mast, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
You know, it was painted by President John F. Kennedy as one of the most paradoxical points that lowering the tax rates actually increases the revenue. This has been true with JFK, with Ronald Reagan, with Clinton, with Bush, and with anybody else that lowers taxes. To give you an example, when Ronald Reagan lowered the top marginal tax rates from 70 to 28%, the revenue went from roughly $500 billion to nearly $1 trillion. That's one of those examples to say why we shouldn't be looking to raise the tax rate, but lower the tax rate if we do want to bring increased revenue into this economy. And you ask yourself why? It's because we allow people to go out there and invest in their community because we let them keep more money in their pocket. And that's ultimately what we need to strive to do, is put more money in the individual's pocket.
On round 3 now, and our panelists have general questions for both of the candidates. Each of them will have 60 seconds to respond and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Mr. Perkins will answer first on this first question. Ms. Rodriguez, your question.
What should the federal government do about decreasing the number of police-involved shootings, or do you see this as a state's issue?
I didn't hear your question, I'm sorry.
Let me repeat it, hold on. What should the federal government do to decrease the number of police-involved shootings, or do you see this as a state's issue?
I think this is an issue that affects everybody, state and the federal government. But here's what I can tell you. When I go to Washington, I'm going to sit down and work with our experts. I'm not going to sit there from Washington, D.C. and try to make decisions. So I'm going to come back to my district, and I'm going to sit with our police chiefs and our sheriffs, and I'm going to ask them, what do you need from Congress to improve community relations? Training within our officers. What does the federal government need to give you to help keep our communities safe? Obviously, this is a problem we have in this country that has to be addressed. But it's not going to get solved unless we understand that some things are at the local level. And this is one of those that belong at the local level. Work with our law enforcement, work with, again, with our police chiefs and our sheriffs, our rank and file members, not just the leadership in law enforcement. The rank and files are patrolmen that are on the streets every day, and say, what do you need from us to help you do your job and help reduce these senseless shootings that are taking place, not only in District 18, but throughout this country?
Mr. Mast, you have 60 seconds.
Training, training, more training. That was the solution in the military to making sure that we were proficient at our job. And that's one of the things that we need to make sure that every law enforcement has access to in order to be at the level of proficiency that they need in order to conduct their job well. One of the things that's peripheral to this issue that many people talk about is the idea of body cameras out there, and should law enforcement have those? And that's something that should be decided by each state, each locality, each precinct for themselves. I'll tell you that I personally have spoken with many law enforcement officers, and while they do see this as another piece of equipment that could be burdensome to them carrying out as they're on patrol, they also, many of them, see this as a vital piece of equipment to document what's going on as they're out there on patrol. And I'm with many of those law enforcement officers in saying that if these precincts decide that they have the ability in order to fund these, and that if they need the help from the federal government, as they often get these DHS grants for different law enforcement agencies, that we should be out there and making sure they have the funds in order to get the cameras that they need in order to making sure that these incidents are accounted for.
Mr. Perkins, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, that's great. Earlier, my opponent said I like to print money. Well, bottom line is we have a tremendous shortfall in our budget right now. So I would print money for our seniors to solve the problems, the fact that most of them are fighting day to day, week to week. And I would print money to solve this problem right here that we're talking about, to provide the support and all the technology and the training, as I said when I spoke, for our law enforcement. Because some things, if we print that money today, that dime we print today is going to return $1 in investment within the next 10 years. So it's not costing us more. We're just fronting the money, and it's going to save us money down the road. And it's actually going to improve the quality of life. It's going to save lives on top of it. Sometimes you need to make tough decisions, fund those things now, and they'll return an investment in the very near future.
Mr. Mast, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
So what you heard again was Randy proposing that we print more money, print more money, print more money. And as I said already, for our seniors, for our retirees, for anybody that's on a fixed income, to have somebody running for Congress who thinks that the solution is to go out there and print more money when it's going to make the cost for you to go to Publix, the cost for you to pay your air conditioning bill, that much more expensive when the amount that you're bringing in is not doubling, That is one of the biggest concerns that you should have about anybody seeking office, is that they're going to be party to inflation, and unfortunately, I don't think my opponent understands, as I said, the economics of this issue.
Mr. Bennett, your question for the candidates.
Sure, question about immigration. Do you support a pathway to citizenship or legal status for the estimated 11 or 12 million people that are in the country illegally? And if not, what should be done about those people?
Mr. Mast, you have 60 seconds.
I think it's very unfortunate that, number one, the rule of law was not adhered to for all of those that came into this country illegally, whether it was they simply crossed the border or whether it was that they overstayed their visa. I personally am not a proponent for a pathway to citizenship for those that have made their first endeavor into this country breaking our law. That's not to say I wouldn't be open to an idea for making a legal work status for those that are still in this country, for finding a way for them to be here and contribute to this society. It is certainly a conversation that I am open to. But if your first venture into this country is to not respect the laws of our land, then I find it very difficult to grant citizenship to you as an individual.
Mr. Perkins, you have 60 seconds to answer.
I'll answer that, but prior to what Brian said, I understand what a budget is. I've been dealing with budgets and very tough decisions for the last 30 years in my own company, and I'm not looking to print money. What I'm saying is if you want to solve the problems that our seniors are having today, you have to fund that today. So to improve the quality of their life, and I will make the tough decision to do that. I do support a path to citizenship, but I understand that we have to secure our borders and enforce our immigration laws first and foremost. This notion that we might deport millions of people, it's never going to happen. It's fantasy land, quite frankly. I'd rather take those billions of dollars that we're talking about, billions upon billions of dollars, and put them into jobs, into schools, into training, into infrastructure, water projects throughout this country. I want to take the 12 million people that are here illegally now, and I want to bring them up, allow them to start paying taxes into the system, which will add to the money that the federal government collects, which will help talk about a lot of these things that we need to fund. I want to allow them to buy their own health insurance. So yes, that citizenship has to be earned, whether it's 7, 10, or 12 years down the road. That's what I support.
Mr. Mast, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, I can tell you as somebody of Hispanic descent, I'm very capable of looking at this issue and saying that's the beautiful thing about immigration is it doesn't discriminate against anybody. It affects every person that wants to come into this country in the exact same way. I am not a proponent, as I've said, for finding that same pathway to citizenship for those that have entered our country illegally. I do think that we need to reform the way that people are granted access to this country and certainly reform what's going on with those that are here illegally, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to address this a little bit more because my time is up now.
Mr. Perkins, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, again, we need to enforce our immigration laws, and we need to strengthen our borders, absolutely without question. But again, I support an earned path to citizenship, 7, 10, 12 years, whatever that may be, by working with other members of Congress to make sensible decisions and hard decisions in this country.
Ms. Eschbach, your question for the candidates.
President Obama has said that recent talk about the Muslim communities and Muslim countries has damaged our standing on the international stage. Would you be mindful of how you speak and that it's representative of the area? And how do we go out and build bridges again?
Mr. Perkins, you have 60 seconds to answer.
Well, listen, anybody in this room or anybody in this country's heart will go out for the little boy who was washed up on the beach and drowned, the little boy who was caught when the building was bombed. We all saw him loaded up into the ambulance. But we have laws that exist in this country right now, and we need to rely on our FBI and our other agencies. There is a process in this country right now. We have processes and laws on the books. If that's 2.5 years, but I'm willing to sit down with other members of Congress. I'm going to sit down with our FBI and other intelligence agencies because they have the data. We've entrusted them to protect this country and make smart decisions, educated decisions. So I'm going to sit down with them and I'm going to have an open conversation. Is the 2.5-year time frame enough? Do we need to increase that to 3? But I also support any young child around this country, whether they're Syrian refugees or from any country, that we should be willing to take in with our open hearts because we're a caring, loving nation, any child around this world, and find a home for them with families in this country and provide safe and loving homes for them immediately.
Mr. Mast, you have 60 seconds to answer the question.
To answer your question, I try to be mindful of every single person that I'm speaking to. I try to be completely respectful to every single person that I'm speaking to, regardless of their background. that should not indicate that we should have a weakness or an aversion to identifying problems that we see for what they are. We have a problem around the world, and we have a problem in this country with the threat of radical Islamic jihadist terrorists. And if we're afraid to utter those words, if we're afraid to mention that, if we're afraid to talk about that, then we're never going to be able to overcome that threat, because that is one of the pinnacle things that you need to do with any problem that you face, is be able to identify that threat for what it is. So yes, certainly, I will speak very respectfully to those that are in the Muslim community, but I will not gloss over the issues that are related to radical Islamic jihadist terrorism that are affecting the breadth of this entire world.
Mr. Perkins, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
They are radical, extreme terrorists. Brian, you and I agree on this. We speak the same words. However, we are a passionate country, and we have to address these things on a smart, sensible basis. And we have the intelligence agencies, we have the FBI. Brian, I'm just as passionate, and I love this country just as much as you do, and I will do everything I can, as you would, with other members of Congress, to make the smart decisions and the tough decisions to keep this country safe and free from terrorism, not only here, but with our friends around the world.
Mr. Mast, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
The fact is, terrorism has been my life's work, as I mentioned in my opening comments, with 3 federal agencies. I have a very unique perspective on it that luckily most will never have. I don't wish it upon anybody. And I can tell you this, when we're talking about looking at terrorists entering this country, we need to look at a number of things. Combating those terrorists overseas, making sure that there's no pipeline for them to be trained overseas and then find their way into our country, making sure that they can't come through one of our porous borders, making sure that we have security professionals in security roles, because that is not always the case, and making sure that we have very common sense vetting for those coming into our country, having programs like behavioral detection that are used so robustly in some of our friendly allies like Israel.
Let's take some questions now from social media that were submitted to us. Rick Yu wants to know, do you think global warming is real and is happening right now, or do you think we need to study it more? Mr. Perkins, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Absolutely, and I do believe in climate change. I dive, I'm in the water. I've been doing it my whole life, so I can see the effects when I'm diving and I'm looking at our coral reef systems and our turtle grass and these types of things. However, we have to do it in a smart, sensible way. We have to protect our American businesses and our American companies. We have to pass smart regulations, environmental rules, as we're trying to deal with climate change and global warming. But we cannot do it in a way that is hurting our own businesses in the country and keeping them from being able to be as competitive as they need to be. We have to stop asking our companies to take the full burden of the rest of the world. We have to make sure the rest of the world, and China and some of other nations, to enforce the environmental rules and regulations on them before we start forcing rules and regulations, continue to enforce rules and regulations on our American businesses that are costing us jobs and costing us the competitiveness that we have in this country. Yes, I care about the environment, but I also care about our companies, and I care about jobs that we're losing and livable wages that provide insurance and pensions and quality life for all Americans in this country.
Mr. Mast, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
I do believe in anthropogenic climate change. It's something that I think very passionately about. I studied the environment as a student up at Harvard University. I can tell you, unfortunately, much of the dendritic research is still not completely conclusive, which is something that I think allows a lot of people to question what is going on with climate change. Beyond that, I can tell you I think there are a number of important responsibilities that all of us need to pay attention to in this world. We need to make sure that we understand that we have an economic responsibility, and we have a social responsibility, and we have an environmental responsibility as well. And we need to look at all of those equally when we're looking at the legislation that we're going to put forward for this country so that people can still live and that we can still have a prosperous nation, and that's the way that I'll work.
All right, another question from social media. Dustin M. writes, I am a small business owner working 7 days a week. How will you help small business owners with taxation, as well as being able to actually afford health insurance for self and employees? Mr. Mast, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, these are probably some of the biggest issues that face every small business owner, is making sure that we get the federal government out of their way, whether it's in terms of the amount that they have to pay into for taxes, or whether it's what they have to pay into in order to cover people with health care with programs like the Affordable Care Act. I already mentioned as one of the statistics to say that on average, Floridians are going to see a 17% premium hike in terms of the cost of the Affordable Care Act. This is one of those hurdles to those individuals that have small businesses having that ability to have more dollars in their pocket and go out there and invest in their business, invest in the product that they want to go out there and produce, invest in their infrastructures so that they can be more productive. But one of the other important issues is making sure that we don't have a raise or rather a federal minimum wage. And my proponent is one of those individuals that wants to see $15 an hour minimum wage. And I think it's one of the interesting points that on this very stage, George Bennett asked this question 2 years ago to the candidates when he said at that time, when they were talking about just $10 an hour minimum wage, that the Congressional Budget Office said at that time that just raising the minimum wage to $10 an hour would cost as many as 500,000 jobs. And right now, he wants to talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's something that would take every single small business from North Palm Beach all the way to Fort Pierce and make it practically impossible for them to run their businesses all across Federal Highway and everywhere else across this district.
Mr. Perkins, you have 45 seconds.
It's interesting to hear my opponent talk about what a small business is when he's never created one job in his life. The fact of the matter is, I understand what small businesses go through. I understand you have to wear hats as human resources. You're the attorney, you're the accountant, and you're everything else in between. I understand when banks used to be banks, when they took risk on their clients. It was a much more conducive environment for success 30 years ago than it is today. We have to deal with the regulations. However, my opponent talks about health insurance. Clearly, we pay 100% of the health insurance for our employees and their families. But he also wants to put it back out there. The reason we had to go with the Obamacare to begin with is millions of people didn't have insurance. So if you put it back out there without common sense approach, insurance companies are going to drive up the rates. They're going to have deductibles that are very high for the millions of Americans who didn't have insurance. So they're not going to be able to afford it anyways. So effectively, they will be insured again. So when it comes to small businesses and what needs to be done, trust me, I know what I'm talking about.
Now let's get to our fourth and final round from our panelists. These are specific questions that are directed at each candidate. Ms. Rodriguez, you have a question for Mr. Mast.
Yep. Mr. Mast, you touched on terrorism earlier, and I'd like you to expand on your comments. Do you support putting more boots on the ground in Syria? And how can we stop attacks on U.S. soil by U.S. citizens? And also, do you support banning the sale of guns to those on the no-fly list?
I hope that's a 90-second question.
It is 90 seconds.
You might have to remind me of some of those questions. Number one, do I support boots on the ground in Syria? I have friends on the ground there as we speak, and I think very cautiously about where any of the lives of any of my friends are in danger. I think about that. It's very, very personal to me, but as I mentioned already, we need to make sure that there's not a pipeline overseas for foreign fighters to be trained and come into the United States of America and commit attacks. Those terrorists that are being inspired here in the United States of America and elsewhere around the world, they are being inspired by what is going on in Syria and Iraq, and that's where it becomes so important that we go out there and we eliminate the threat in those countries. And I can tell you that this is something that, unfortunately, due to the failed policies of this administration, that we have a much bigger problem than what we should have had. When this administration called ISIS the JV team at a time of the Arab Spring when we could have defeated them with nothing but a couple of special operations forces, and now we have to send in a large military group in order to defeat them, that is a major problem. Beyond that, addressing terrorism here in the United States of America, I've given you a few solutions to that. Number one, we need to make sure that we know the individuals that want to come into this country, that we're vetting them, that we're using behavioral detection on the people that are coming into this, where we ask them questions like those that I have been asked when I was being granted our highest level security clearances. When they asked me, have you ever considered committing an act of terrorism? Would you ever consider committing an act of terrorism? And I had to answer that question. We should be asking other people those questions as well. We need to be smart about the people that we're letting into this country, because we have to remember, above all, it is the right of the American citizens to be protected by those people that are in office, and that's what I fight for.
Mr. Perkins, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
When it comes to protecting this country from terrorism here or anywhere around the world, Brian, my opponent and I do not differ, do not disagree on anything. However, unlike my opponent, I'm going to go to D.C., and I'm going to sit down with my friend John McCain, who I've known for 15 years, who's been at my home, and I've supported his candidacies over numerous years. I'm going to sit down with people like that in Congress, and I'm going to sit down and say, I have to make tough votes on the national security interests, not only in this country and keeping this country safe, but decisions we have to make to send our men and women and putting boots on the ground again. And I need your help with it. and I'm going to sit down with our security agencies and our intelligence officials, and I'm going to tell them what do they need from us. Is putting more boots on the ground? Then that's the decision I'm going to vote for. But I'm going to listen to the experts, because it's going to take just more than me or more than my opponent to make those tough decisions, and it should.
Mr. Bennett, you have a question for Mr. Perkins.
Sure. You mentioned a couple times tonight that you're pro-choice on abortion. What is your position on the Hyde Amendment, which since the 1970s has prohibited the use of federal money to pay for most abortions? Hillary Clinton and I think this year's Democratic Party platform advocate getting rid of that. What's your position on that?
First of all, I am 100% pro-choice. And I want to thank Mona for the time she took. And she knows who I'm talking about, Mona Reese, for the time she took at her clinic the other day. Not only was I 1,000% pro-choice, I'm 1,000% pro-choice and will never waver on allowing a woman's right to choose. We do not need to send another man, any man, to Congress who's going to try to tell a woman what decision she should make with her health care issues or any other decisions that a woman has the right to make for herself. We have an amendment in place. If we want to bring that back in front of Congress and discuss in removing that amendment, then I will have a vote when that time comes, and I'll exercise my vote along with 435 other members of Congress when it comes to that particular issue.
Mr. Mast, you have 45 seconds for a rebuttal.
My opponent has called me radical and extremist numerous times on this stage without any provocation, I think without any reason to do so. I would like to see him answer this question because I think it falls among the most radical views that could exist out there. He said he is 100% a pro-choice individual. So does that mean that you are a proponent for partial birth abortion, that you are a proponent for third trimester abortions, that you believe the unborn have absolutely no rights? Because if that is your opinion, I believe that you are probably ranking among the most extreme people on this stage.
Please, no applause, please. We're a little short on time. Ms. Eschbach, you have a question for Mr. Mast, but I'm going to have to reduce the answer time, so we have time for closing statements.
Sure, we've seen a lot of turnover in this office in the last 15 years that I've been here. Will you commit yourself to this area? I know you both just moved here, but will you commit yourself to this area and to this office so that when you gain traction on issues, we don't lose them in 2 years?
Mr. Mast, I'm just going to give you 60 seconds to respond.
Yes, ma'am. I commit myself 100% to this area. It was the honor of my life serving this country. I'm honored that any of you are considering me to represent you in Congress. And I tell people, as much as there's very large issues that we've spoken about this evening, whether it's tax reform or Social Security, a number of other things, I understand that as one person, I'm not going to go up there to Washington, D.C. and affect these issues solely, that I have to work with, 400 plus other members of Congress out there and another side in the Senate and the President of the United States of America to get things passed. The one thing that I can guarantee when I speak to constituents of this area is this, that if you have a problem, if you have an issue, if your small business has a problem, if you need me to be a loud mouthpiece for you, if you need me to go out there and represent you against some federal agency who is harassing you, that I will be the loudest possible voice that I can be for your issues. And that is how I will fight for every single one of you across this district.
Mr. Perkins, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, first of all, in the prior question, Brian wants to make the question what he said about abortion. It's not about abortion. It's about a woman's fundamental right to choose the decisions that are best for her, period, with no exceptions. However, unlike my opponent, I say this very humbly, I do not need a job. I've been provided tremendous opportunity in my life that the only interest and the only special interest outside of sugar and the all aboard Florida money that he's taken, the only special interest that I have will be the people of District 18 that I represent. Those are my interests. And yes, I will be dedicated to this district 100% of the time.
Now we have time for closing statements now. Mr. Perkins, you will go first, and you have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
On August 30th, I was voting. And I saw my name, Randy Perkins, for Congress on the ballot. How a kid from a small town in Miami who grew up in a working class family, who's been working hard just as every other American has since he's 10 years old, to potentially have the honor to represent this district in Congress was very humbling. However, when you talk about our seniors and prescription drug costs, and you talk about mental health issues in our children, anxiety, depression, the opioid epidemic that's destroying the very fabric of this country, our seniors that are now more important, more dependent than ever on the SNAP food stamp program for $125 more a month. I'm pretty sure our seniors, when they worked hard their entire life, did not expect to go into retirement depending on food stamps just to get by on a day-to-day basis. We can talk about criminal justice reform. Obviously, issues that are unique to this district are algae crisis in our waterways, our single mothers, our veterans, our first responders, all the challenges that we have in this district and throughout this country. And my opponent is extreme, and he is radical. When you want to go to Congress and make your first mission to defund Planned Parenthood 100%, when you don't want to deny a woman's right to choose, when you want to strip the LGBT community from equality and the human rights that they should have just like every other American, when you stand behind a man like Donald Trump, who said repulsive, very vulgar things against women, I'm pretty sure that puts you in the extreme radical part of your party. I'm a problem solver. I've been doing it my whole life. I know how to work with people. I will find common ground, and I will solve the problems that this district has in District 18 for everybody.
Thank you,
every
Mr.
independent,
Perkins.
every Republican, every Democrat that I represent.
Mr. Mast, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
I think my opponent has proven that he is deeply committed to saying things that are simply false. I can tell you I'm not going to predict to you who's going to win this race. I can tell you the one thing that I won't lose, ever, is my integrity. People ask me often what made me get into this race. It's the most frequent question I get. And I can tell you I don't remember the exact day, but I do remember the moment. It was as I was laying in a bed in Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I was looking across the room at my wife, Brianna, who was holding our then 6-month-old son. It was a much more emotional time in my life as I didn't know what my future held. And I looked at her right then, and I told her, I'm not going to let the best defense that I give our country, and I'm not going to let the best example that I ever set for our children be something that's behind me or be something that's in my past. And that is my commitment to you this evening, that I will fight for you every single day with every single thing that I have inside of me, the same way that I did it on the battlefield, to fight for you without regard for any personal gain, to fight for you without regard for any personal sacrifice, and to do everything that I can to fight for the issues that are important to you every single day as your representative, as your member of Congress. That's what I think that you're owed, and that's the way that I'll fight.
Gentlemen, thank you.